The dust tasted like copper and old regret. Sergeant Mackenzie Thornwell pressed her cheek against the shattered edge of concrete, feeling the cold bite of stone against skin that had stopped sweating an hour ago. Above her, the Afghan sky hung like hammered steel, indifferent to the war being waged beneath it. The Hindu Kush Mountains rose in jagged teeth around Outpost Legacy, their ancient peaks watching as they had watched 1,000 conflicts before this one. 7 rounds. That was all she had left. 7 bullets in the last magazine for her Mark 22 sniper rifle. 7 chances to stop what was coming up the valley floor like a plague of locusts made flesh and rage. To her left, Corporal Harrison Blackwood lay motionless against a pile of sandbags that had absorbed shrapnel meant for both of them. Blood pooled dark beneath his head, mixing with the powdered concrete that filled the air like snow in hell. His chest rose and fell in shallow, rattling gasps. The spotting scope he had been using lay in pieces 3 feet away, its precision glass now glittering shards that caught the morning light. Mackenzie reached down with trembling fingers and touched the magazine. The metal was warm from her body heat. 33 ounces of steel and lead. The difference between living and dying. Between victory and massacre. Through the haze of pulverized stone and diesel smoke, she could see them. 800 Taliban fighters moving through the valley like a dark tide, their vehicles kicking up rooster tails of ancient dust. They were not running. They were advancing with the confidence of men who had already won, who knew that 2 American soldiers could not possibly stop what was coming. They were wrong, but they did not know that yet. Mackenzie's radio crackled to life, the voice on the other end pitched high with barely controlled panic. Hitman 6 to Overwatch. They are everywhere. We count at least 800, repeat, 800 hostiles advancing on our position. The refugee convoy is exposed. We need fire support now or we are all dead. All of us. Do you copy? She keyed the mic with a finger that left a smear of Harrison's blood on the transmit button. Solid copy, Hitman 6. Overwatch has eyes on. Stand by. The voice came back, and this time the panic had crystallized into something harder. Desperation. Stand by, stand by. They are 300 yards out and closing. Where is your support? Where is... Mackenzie released the transmit button. She had nothing left to say that bullets could not say better. She was 26 years old, but in the gray morning light of the Hindu Kush, she looked like she had lived 3 lifetimes. Lean and hard-built, like a long-distance runner who had forgotten how to stop. Her skin was the color of desert sand, stained darker by weeks under the Afghan sun. Her eyes were the pale gray of winter storms, and right now they held the same cold promise. Before the rifle, she had been nothing special. Just another cavalry scout from West Virginia, a girl from the mountains who had grown up with the sound of rifles echoing through hollows that had never known silence. But Mackenzie Thornwell had always been a creature of the quiet spaces, the places between heartbeats, where the world held its breath. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small olive-drab sock filled with heavy plastic beads. To anyone else, it would look like trash, a forgotten piece of gear. But to a sniper, it was everything. The sand sock sat beneath the buttstock of her rifle, providing the micro-adjustments needed to keep crosshairs steady at distances where most men could not even see their targets. This particular sock was old, very old. The wool had gone thin in places and the stitching had been repaired a dozen times with thread that did not match. It had been her grandfather's. Sergeant First Class Wyatt Thornwell had carried it through France in 1944, through the hedgerows of Normandy and the frozen hell of the Ardennes. He had given it to her father, Major Garrett Thornwell, who had carried it through the burning oil fields of Kuwait in 1991. Now it was hers. Mackenzie placed the sock carefully beneath the stock of her Mark 22, feeling the way the beads shifted and settled, cradling the weapon with the patience of 70 years and 3 wars. She could almost feel their hands on hers. Her grandfather, her father, the ghosts of men who had stood in similar places with similar odds and had refused to break. One shot, one life. Her grandfather used to whisper. Do not waste the lead, girl. Make it count. She would make it count. The memory came without warning, the way they always did. 15 years earlier, West Virginia. The Appalachian Mountains in autumn, when the leaves turned the color of fire and the air smelled like wood smoke and frost. Mackenzie was 10 years old, small for her age, but already showing the wiriness that would define her later years. She moved through the forest like a shadow, her footfalls silent on the carpet of leaves. Ahead of her, barely visible through the trees, her father knelt beside a fallen oak, his rifle resting across his knee. Major Garrett Thornwell was a man built from hard angles and quiet strength. His face was weathered from years under foreign suns, his hands scarred from 100 small battles that never made it into official reports. He had the eyes of a hunter, pale gray, like his daughter's eyes, that saw everything and forgot nothing. "What do you see?" he asked without turning around. Mackenzie squinted into the thicket ahead, searching the tangle of brush and shadow. "Nothing," she admitted. "Look again. Not for the deer. Look for what does not belong. The shape that breaks the pattern." She looked, really looked, and then she saw it. Just the curve of an ear, twitching slightly against the breeze. The rest of the deer was invisible, camouflaged perfectly in the dappled light. "There," she breathed. Her father smiled. It was a rare expression on his face, and it transformed him. "That is the gift, Kenzie. Most people see what they expect to see. A hunter sees what is actually there." He handed her the rifle. It was too big for her, too heavy, but she took it anyway with the reverence of a child being handed something sacred. "Now breathe. In, out. Between the heartbeats, that is where you find the stillness." She did as he taught her. Breathed in, breathed out. Found the space between the thumps of her heart where the world seemed to freeze. "Do not pull the trigger," he whispered. "Let it surprise you. Let the rifle decide when." The shot cracked through the forest like a breaking branch. The deer dropped without knowing what had killed it. Her father put his hand on her shoulder, and the weight of it felt like an anchor. "You have the gift, Kenzie. Never waste it." 6 years later, he was dead. The helicopter had gone down during a training exercise at Fort Campbell. Mechanical failure, the official report said. 17 men aboard. No survivors. They had found pieces of the wreckage scattered across 3 square miles of Kentucky farmland. They had not found much of the men. Mackenzie had been 16. Old enough to understand death. Too young to understand waste. At the funeral, her grandfather had stood beside her ramrod straight, despite his 81 years. He had not cried. Men of his generation did not cry, where people could see. But when the honor guard folded the flag and presented it to her mother, Mackenzie had seen his jaw tighten until the tendons stood out like cables. After the ceremony, he had taken her aside. "Your father was the best I ever trained," he said quietly. "Better than me. Better than anyone I knew in the war. He had the patience of stone and eyes that could see tomorrow. You have those same eyes, girl." He had reached into his jacket and pulled out the sand sock. Even then, it had been old, worn thin by decades of use. "This was mine. I gave it to your father when he went to the desert. Now I am giving it to you. Not because you need it, because it needs you. It needs to keep doing what it was made for." "What is that?" she had asked. "Keeping good people alive. Sending bad people to hell." Mackenzie had taken the sock with hands that did not shake. She had made a promise that day, standing beside her father's grave with the weight of 2 wars pressed into her palm. She would finish what he started. Fort Benning, Georgia, summer 2010. The air so thick with humidity, you could drink it. The United States Army Sniper School sat on the edge of the base like a monastery for men who spoke the language of distance and death. 63 days of training that broke strong men and sent them home wondering why they had ever thought they were hard enough. Mackenzie stood in a formation of 48 candidates, one of 3 women in a sea of skeptical faces. The men around her stood taller, broader, heavier. They had come from Rangers and Special Forces and infantry units that still believed women belonged anywhere but here. At the front of the formation stood Master Gunnery Sergeant Dutch Callahan, 59 years old and built like a fence post that had been left out in the weather for decades. His face was the color of old leather lined with scars that told stories he would never share. He had eyes like chips of flint, and when he looked at you, you felt measured and found wanting. "Welcome to the schoolhouse." Callahan began, his voice like gravel being crushed under tank treads. "Most of you will not be here in a week. That is not a threat. That is a statistical fact. This course has a 70% attrition rate. 7 out of 10 of you will fail. You will fail because you are not patient enough. You will fail because you are not disciplined enough. You will fail because when the moment comes to pull that trigger, you will hesitate." He walked down the line, his boots crunching on the Georgia clay. "A sniper is not a shooter. Any idiot can pull a trigger. A sniper is a hunter, a mathematician, a ghost. You will learn to read wind like a language. You will learn to calculate trajectory in your sleep. You will learn to lie in your own filth for days without moving, watching and waiting for a single moment that may never come." He stopped in front of Mackenzie, looked her up and down with the expression of a man examining a tool he suspects is defective. "Women," he said flatly, "lack the cold blood required for this work. They feel too much. They hesitate. They second guess. In my 28 years teaching this course, I have never seen a woman graduate who could match the top 10% of male graduates. The formation was silent. 48 sets of eyes locked forward, but Mackenzie felt every one of them slide toward her for just a second, gauging her reaction. She kept her eyes front, did not blink, did not flinch. If you are here because you think you have something to prove, Callahan continued, still looking at her, you are already done. This course does not care about your politics. It does not care about your feelings. It cares about one thing only. Can you put steel on target when it matters? Can you take a life at 1,000 yards and sleep soundly that night? He leaned in close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. Can you buy? Mackenzie met his eyes, held them. Yes, gunnery sergeant. Callahan stared at her for a long moment. Then he moved on. That night in the barracks, she heard the whispers. The bets being placed. How long would she last? A week. 3 days. Some gave here until the first stalking exercise, when they would have to crawl through tick-infested brush for 8 hours without being spotted. She lasted all of it. The stalking exercises where she moved like water through grass, invisible to the walkers who were hunting her. The mathematical nightmares of calculating bullet drop at distances where the Earth's rotation became a factor. The psychological warfare of lying in a hide site for 16 hours fighting sleep and cramps, and the tiny voice in her head that said it would be so easy to just quit. She lasted through it all. On the final day, the test was simple. One shot at 1,000 yards. A target the size of a paper plate. Wind gusting at 15 knots. You had one chance. Mackenzie stepped to the line. The other candidates watched in silence. Callahan stood to the side, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. She settled behind the rifle, felt the weight of it against her shoulder, checked the Kestrel weather meter clipped to her kit. Wind from the northwest 13 knots, gusting to 17. Temperature 91 degrees. Humidity like a wet blanket. She placed her grandfather's sand sock beneath the buttstock, felt it settle, felt the ghost settle with it. Breathe in, breathe out, find the space between heartbeats. The trigger broke at exactly 2.5 pounds of pressure. The recoil punched her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's vapor trail arrow through the heat shimmer and punch dead center into the target. Perfect. The candidates behind her said nothing. What could they say? Callahan walked over to check the target through a spotting scope. He stared at it for a long time. Then he straightened and walked back to where Mackenzie was clearing her rifle. Thornwell, she stood at attention. Gunnery sergeant. He looked at her with something that might have been respect if you squinted at it from the right angle. I was wrong, he said quietly so only she could hear. You move like the shadows. Your father would be proud. It was the only apology she would ever get from him. It was enough. When she graduated 3 days later, she stood at the top of her class, 97 out of 100 possible points. The men who had bet against her paid up in silence. Some of them even shook her hand. But Callahan had been right about one thing. The real test was not on the range. The real test was coming. Forward Operating Base Thunder, Kunar Province, Afghanistan. October 2011. The briefing room smelled like stale coffee sweat and the particular kind of exhaustion that came from fighting a war that had no clear end. Maps covered the walls marked with greased pencil and pins that represented lives hanging in the balance. The air conditioning had died 3 weeks ago, and nobody had the parts to fix it. Captain Wade Garrison stood at the front of the room, his uniform stained with salt rings from too many patrols under the Afghan sun. He was a good officer, the kind who led from the front and bled when his men bled. Right now, he looked like a man who had not slept in days. Here is the situation, he began, tapping the map behind him. Intelligence reports Taliban forces massing here, and here. We estimate 800 to 1,000 fighters. They are preparing for a major assault. He moved his finger along a red line drawn on the map. This is Road Amber. 2,000 civilian refugees, mostly women and children, are using it to escape the fighting. They are exposed, vulnerable. If the Taliban hit them, it will be a massacre. The room was silent except for the buzz of flies against the windows. We are putting a 2-person sniper team on Outpost Legacy. High ground, clear lines of sight down the valley. Your job is to hold that position for 48 hours and provide overwatch for the convoy. You will call fire missions, coordinate air support, and engage high-value targets as needed. Garrison's eyes found Mackenzie in the back of the room. Sergeant Thornwell, you are primary shooter. Yes, sir. Your spotter is Corporal Harrison Blackwood. He has been in country for 6 months. Good eyes, solid operator. He will be here in 5 minutes. Mackenzie nodded. She had heard of Blackwood. Most people had. He was a legend in the scout community, a man who had earned his reputation the hard way. When Harrison Blackwood walked into the briefing room 4 minutes later, Mackenzie understood why. He was 42 years old, but he moved with the careful deliberation of a man whose body had been used hard and put away wet too many times. His face was weathered, lined with the kind of scars you got from being in the wrong place when bad things happened. He had the eyes of someone who had seen the elephant and decided it was not as impressive as everyone claimed. But when those eyes found Mackenzie, something changed in them. Recognition, and something else. Something that looked like old grief. After the briefing, he approached her. "Sergeant Thornwell," he said, extending a hand. She took it. His grip was firm but not aggressive. "Corporal Blackwood, call me Harrison. We are going to be breathing the same air for the next 2 days. Might as well skip the formalities." She nodded. "Mackenzie." He studied her face for a moment, and she saw the wheels turning behind his eyes. "Thornwell," he said slowly, "you are Garrett's daughter." The world seemed to tilt slightly. "You knew my father." Harrison's expression softened in a way that made him look younger. Sadder. "Desert Storm, 1991. I was a scout with the 3rd Armored Cavalry. Your father was attached to our unit as a sniper. We were pushing through the Euphrates Valley when our convoy got hit. RPGs, heavy machine gun fire. Our Bradley took a direct hit. I was trapped inside with a broken leg and a fire spreading through the troop compartment." He paused, and Mackenzie could see him back there 20 years younger and terrified. "Your father pulled me out, under fire. The Bradley cooked off 30 seconds later, killed everyone still inside." Mackenzie felt something tight in her chest. He never mentioned it. He would not have. That was not his way. Harrison smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "He saved my life. I owe him that. I owe him more than that. So when I heard his daughter was going to the sharp end, I volunteered to spot for her. Figure it is the least I can do." "You do not owe me anything," Mackenzie said quietly. "Maybe not, but I owed him, and this is how I pay that debt." They loaded the Chinook helicopter 2 hours before midnight. The rotors beat the air into submission as they lifted off the base, falling away beneath them, like a collection of lights that might wink out at any moment. Inside the cargo bay, Mackenzie and Harrison sat across from each other, their gear piled between them. Harrison leaned over and spoke loudly enough to be heard over the turbines. "Your father used to tell me stories about your grandfather. Said he was the best sniper in his regiment. Said he once held off a German advance for 6 hours with nothing but a Springfield and 20 rounds. 18 rounds, Mackenzie corrected. He missed twice." Harrison grinned. The old man had standards. "He still does. He is 86 and still hunts deer every season." "Good genes." The helicopter banked hard and Mackenzie felt her stomach lurch. Below them, the mountains were black shapes against a slightly less black sky. Somewhere down there, 800 men were preparing to kill refugees, and 2 Americans were going to try to stop them. "Can I ask you something?" Harrison said. "Go ahead. Why did you volunteer for sniper school?" "It is not exactly a popular career choice." Mackenzie was quiet for a moment, listening to the rhythmic thump of the rotors. "My father used to say that the best people are the quiet ones. The ones who do not need to be loud to be strong. I wanted to honor that. I wanted to be the kind of person who could stand in the quiet and not be afraid of what lives there." Harrison nodded slowly. "Your father would be proud. I mean that." "I hope so." The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. 2 minutes to drop zone. Get ready." They stood and checked each other's gear with the practiced efficiency of people who knew that a loose strap could mean death. Rifle, ammunition, Kestrel weather meter, rangefinder, water, medical kit, all the small pieces that added up to survival. The Chinook flared for landing, and the crew chief dropped the ramp. Cold mountain air rushed in, carrying the smell of dust and diesel. "Good hunting," the chief shouted. Mackenzie and Harrison stepped off into the darkness. Outpost Legacy was exactly what its name suggested. The ruins of something that used to matter. Soviet-era concrete and sandbags half buried in accumulated dust. It sat on a ridgeline like a broken tooth overlooking the valley where root amber cut through the terrain like a scar. They spent the first hour setting up their position, sandbags repositioned for better fields of fire, camouflage netting to break up their silhouette, escape routes planned and memorized. Mackenzie assembled her rifle with the kind of reverence other people reserve for religious ceremonies. The Mark 22 was a beautiful weapon, all clean lines and precision engineering. It had been built to put bullets exactly where they needed to go, and in the right hands it could reach out and touch someone at distances that defied belief. She placed her grandfather's sandsock beneath the buttstock. Harrison watched her do it, and something flickered across his face. "What?" she asked. He reached into his pack and pulled out another sandsock. This one was newer, the olive drab darker, but it had the same worn quality of something that had seen use. "Your grandfather's met your father's," he said. "Now yours meets mine. Gulf War. Your father gave this to me the day he pulled me out of that Bradley. Said every good shooter needs one." He placed it next to hers, and for a moment, two wars sat side by side beneath a rifle that might soon decide the fate of a third. "3 generations," Harrison said quietly. "Your grandfather, your father, me, and now you. That is a lot of ghosts riding on one trigger pull." "Good," Mackenzie said. "I will need all the help I can get." They settled in to wait. Waiting was the sniper's true craft. Anyone could shoot. Not everyone could endure the hours of absolute stillness, the boredom that turns sharp and dangerous, the physical discomfort of lying in one position until your body screamed for movement. Harrison glassed the valley with his spotting scope, scanning for any sign of movement. "You ever think about what your father would say if he could see you now?" he asked. Mackenzie considered the question. "I think he would tell me to breathe between the heartbeats, find the stillness." Sounds like him. The night stretched on. Stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the wars of men. Somewhere in the valley, the Taliban were moving, getting into position, preparing for slaughter. And on the ridge, 2 Americans waited with 7 bullets and the weight of 3 wars on their shoulders. At 0547 hours, just as the sky began to gray with the promise of dawn, Harrison spoke. "Movement, valley floor, 400 yards. Mackenzie shifted her position slightly, bringing the scope to her eye. She saw them. Scouts. 3 men moving carefully through the rocks, testing the route ahead for the main force. "Range," she asked. 1,400 yards, wind 3 knots from the northwest. Mackenzie tracked them through her scope. They were being careful. Professional. They knew what they were doing. "Do not engage," Harrison said. "Let them pass. We need to save our ammunition for when it matters." She watched them disappear into the terrain. Professional, disciplined. "How long until the main force?" she asked. Harrison checked his watch. "If the intel is right, 30 minutes, maybe less." The radio crackled. Captain Garrison's voice already tight with tension. "Overwatch, this is Hitman 6. The convoy is moving into the valley now. Ita to your position, 20 minutes. How does it look up there?" Mackenzie keyed the mic. "Clear so far. Hitman 6, we have eyes on." "Roger, be advised we are getting reports of heavy activity to the north. They might be trying to flank the convoy." "Copy. We will watch for it." Harrison lowered his scope and looked at her. "You ready for this?" Mackenzie thought about her grandfather in the hedgerows of France, her father in the desert of Kuwait, Harrison bleeding in a burning Bradley. "I have been ready my whole life." The sun broke over the eastern peaks at 0612 hours. Golden light spilled down the valley like honey, illuminating a scene from a nightmare. They came in waves, trucks and technical vehicles mounting heavy machine guns, motorcycles carrying men with RPGs, infantry spreading out in loose formations moving with the confidence of overwhelming force. 800 men, maybe more. Harrison's voice was steady despite what they were seeing. "Confirmed 800 plus hostiles advancing. Multiple vehicle-mounted weapons. They are spreading to flank positions." Mackenzie scanned through her scope, cataloging targets. So many targets. Primary threats. Vehicle-mounted DSK at 11 o'clock, range 1,800 yards. Second DSK at 2 o'clock, range 1,600. Those are your biggest problems. The radio erupted with Captain Garrison's voice no longer calm. "Overwatch, we have visual on hostile forces. Holy God, there are hundreds of them. The convoy is exposed. We need air support now." Harrison keyed the radio. "Negative on air support, Hitman 6. Weather is closing in. Rotary wing is grounded for the next 30 minutes minimum." "Then we need you, Overwatch. We need you to start thinning them out, or we are all dead down here." "You copy." Mackenzie looked at Harrison. He looked back at her. "Your call, Sergeant." She took a breath, reached down and touched the 2 sandsocks beneath her rifle, felt the weight of 3 generations pressing against her spine. "Copy Hitman 6, engaging targets now." She settled in behind the scope, found her breathing, found the space between heartbeats where the world went quiet. And then the valley exploded with the sound of incoming mortar fire. The first round hit 50 yards behind their position, throwing up a fountain of rock and dirt. The second hit 30 yards out. They were walking the fire and searching for the position with mathematical precision. "They have a spotter!" Harrison shouted over the explosions. "They know we are up here." Another mortar round this 120 yards out, close enough that Mackenzie felt the pressure wave slam into her chest. "Find him!" she shouted. Harrison swung his spotting scope, scanning the opposite ridge. "I am looking, I am—" The RPG hit without warning. 1 second, Harrison was next to her, calling targets. The next second, the world was fire and thunder and flying concrete. Mackenzie felt herself lifted and thrown, her body slamming into the sandbags with enough force to drive the air from her lungs. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. She tasted blood. Her vision swam. When the world stopped spinning, she pushed herself up on shaking arms and looked for Harrison. He was down, unconscious, blood running from a gash across his scalp. His spotting scope lay in pieces, the precision optics shattered beyond repair. Mackenzie crawled to him, checked his pulse. Still alive, breathing. But he was out, completely out. She was alone. The radio crackled with Captain Garrison's voice, distant and tinny through the ringing in her ears. "Overwatch report. Overwatch, do you copy?" She keyed the mic with fingers that shook. "Hitman 6 Overwatch is still active, so spotter is down, continuing watching." There was a pause. Then Garrison's voice came back, quieter now, almost gentle. "Overwatch, how many are you up there?" "Just me, sir." Another pause. Longer this time. "Understood. Do what you can, and Overwatch, good luck." Mackenzie looked down at Harrison. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. On his chest, she could see the sand sock he had taken from her father 20 years ago. She picked it up, placed it next to her grandfather's beneath the rifle. 3 generations, 3 wars, 1 trigger. The valley was filling with the enemy like water flooding the canyon. 800 men who thought they had already won. Mackenzie Thornwell settled in behind her rifle and began to prove them wrong. The world had narrowed to a circle of glass 3 inches wide. Through the loopholed Mark 5 HD scope, Mackenzie watched the valley transform into a killing field. The Taliban forces spread out like oil on water, their vehicles kicking up plumes of dust that hung in the still morning air. They moved with the confidence of predators who had cornered their prey. They had no idea they were being watched. Her right hand found the Kestrel weather meter clipped to her chest rig. The small digital screen flickered to life, displaying numbers that would mean nothing to most people, but meant everything to her. Wind speed 22 knots, direction northwest. Temperature 78 degrees and climbing. Humidity 18%. She did the math automatically, her brain processing variables that would make a physicist weep. Bullet drop, wind drift, air density. The Coriolis effect at extreme range. Each calculation had to be perfect because she would not get a second chance. 7 bullets, 800 men. The odds were laughable. They were also irrelevant. Mackenzie shifted her position slightly, the movement so small it would be invisible to anyone watching. Pain lanced through her ribs where she had hit the sandbags. Probably cracked, definitely bruised. She ignored it. Pain was just information, and right now she had more important data to process. Behind her, Harrison groaned softly, still unconscious, still bleeding. She could not help him. Not yet. The best thing she could do for him now was finish the mission and get them both out alive. Captain Garrison's voice crackled over the radio, barely audible over the ringing that still filled her ears. "All stations, this is Hitman 6. Hostile forces are 200 yards from the convoy. We are engaging, but we are outnumbered 10 to 1. Overwatch, we need fire support on that heavy machine gun, or they are going to cut us to pieces." Mackenzie keyed the mic. "Hitman 6 Overwatch copies. Engaging primary threat now." She released the transmit button and focused on the scope. The Soviet DSK heavy machine gun sat mounted on the back of a Toyota Technical, 1,800 yards downrange. The gunner was already traversing his weapon, searching for targets among the exposed convoy vehicles. The DSK fired a 12.7 millimeter round, the same caliber as the American .50 caliber. Each bullet was the size of a man's thumb and could punch through engine blocks. If that gun opened up on the convoy, it would be a massacre. Mackenzie pressed her cheek against the stock of the Mark 22, feeling the cool composite material against her skin. Her left hand found the 2 sand socks beneath the rifle, her grandfather's and Harrison's, stacked one atop the other, like a foundation built from old wars. She began her breathing cycle. In through the nose, slow and controlled. Hold for 2 seconds. Out through the mouth, even slower. Each breath lowered her heart rate, calmed the adrenaline that wanted to make her hands shake. Her world contracted. The valley faded. The explosions faded. Harrison's labored breathing faded. There was only the reticle and the target and the rhythm of her pulse. She heard her father's voice, as clear as if he were standing beside her. "In that pause after you exhale, That is where you find peace. The Taliban gunner behind the DSHK shifted his position, adjusting his aim. Through the scope, Mackenzie could see his face. Young, maybe 25. He had a dark beard and wore a Pakol cap. He was someone's son, someone's brother. He was also about to kill innocent people. She made the final adjustments to her hold. 3 mils left for win. The elevation turret was already dialed for 1,800 yards. The morning sun was behind her, which meant no glare in the scope. The wind was steady, the air was clear. All the variables had aligned. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, feeling the 2.5 pounds of pressure required to break the sear. She did not pull. She waited. Waited for her lungs to empty. Waited for the pause. Waited for the universe to hold its breath. Then she simply let the rifle do what it was built to do. The recoil was a sharp punch into her shoulder, familiar and almost comforting. The sound of the shot rolled down the valley like distant thunder. Through the scope, she did not see the bullet. She saw the result. The DSK gunner's head snapped back. He collapsed out of view behind the technical's cab. The heavy machine gun fell silent before it had fired a single round. For 3 full seconds, the enemy advance seemed to stutter. The Taliban forces kept moving, but something had changed. Somewhere in their midst, a man had just died, and they had not heard the shot that killed him. That was when they began to understand what they were facing. Mackenzie worked the bolt, the empty brass casing ejecting with a metallic clink against the concrete. A fresh round slid into the chamber with the smooth precision of German engineering. 6 rounds left. Captain Garrison's voice came through the radio, and this time there was something new in it. Not quite hope, but the absence of total despair. Overwatch confirmed DSK is down. That was one hell of a shot. Who are you up there? Mackenzie keyed the mic, her voice steady despite the adrenaline singing through her veins. Call sign Lady Death. Target neutralized. The radio went silent. She imagined Garrison down in the valley looking up at the ridgeline trying to process what he had just heard. The call sign was not official. It was not in any roster or table of organization. But every sniper knew it. Every soldier who had studied the craft knew the name. Lady Death. Lyudmila Pavlichenko. The Soviet sniper who had hunted 309 men through the frozen hell of the Eastern Front. The most successful female sniper in history. It was a legend, a ghost story, a name whispered in the dark. Now it was real. Behind Mackenzie, Harrison stirred. His hand moved weakly, fingers clawing at the concrete. Mackenzie. She glanced back at him. His eyes were open, but they were not focused. Blood matted his hair and his face had gone the color of old paper. Stay down, Harrison. Do not move. Can't see straight. Everything's double. Concussion, severe one. His spotting scope was destroyed, his vision compromised. He was done as a spotter, which meant Mackenzie was working alone now. Without a second set of eyes to call wind or watch for threats, she could not see through her narrow field of view. In sniper doctrine, going solo was a death sentence. The shooter saw the world through a straw focused entirely on the target. The spotter watched everything else. Flanking movements, wind changes, enemy counter-snipers zeroing in on your position. Without a spotter, you were blind. Mackenzie would have to be her own eyes. She returned to the scope, scanning the valley floor. The Taliban forces had stopped their advance. Men were gathered around the technical, with the dead gunner pointing up at the ridgeline, trying to locate the source of the shot. They would not find her, not yet, but they would keep looking. Her radio crackled again. This time it was a different voice. Older, rougher. Overwatch, this is Reaper 7. We have multiple mortar teams setting up on the North Ridge. If they get those tubes operational, they are going to drop rounds right on top of you. Can you suppress? Mackenzie glassed the North Ridge, scanning for targets. There, movement in a cluster of scrub oak, men hauling mortar tubes and base plates, setting up a fire base that would rain death on her position. And they're partially hidden by camouflage netting, a single man with binoculars. The spotter. The brain directing the mortars. Range 1,150 yards. She adjusted her aim, dialing the elevation turret down. The clicks were audible even over the distant sounds of gunfire. Each click represented 1/10 of a milliradian, a fraction of an angle so small it seemed impossible that it mattered. But at 1,000 yards, 1 mil was worth 36 inches of error. Get the math wrong and you missed. Get it right and you changed the outcome of the battle. Through the scope, she studied the spotter. He was young, very young, maybe 15, 16 at most. His face still had the softness of adolescence beneath the thin beard he was trying to grow. He wore a chest rig that looked 3 sizes too large on his narrow frame. A boy playing soldier. A boy who was about to get soldiers killed. Mackenzie felt something tighten in her chest. This was the part they did not teach you in sniper school. The part where you looked into the scope and saw not a target, but a person. Someone who had been a child not long ago. Someone who might have laughed and played and dreamed of a future that did not involve dying on a mountainside in Afghanistan. Her grandfather's voice came to her, rough with age and wisdom earned in blood. War does not care about age, girl. Only about who lives and who dies. You hesitate, and good people die. You do your job, and maybe good people live. That is the only choice you get. The mortar spotter raised his binoculars, scanning the valley. In 30 seconds, he would direct fire onto her position. In 1 minute, she and Harrison would be dead. Mackenzie made her choice. Her heart became a steady drum. She entered the place where only the target existed. Let the rifle speak. The shot broke clean. Through the scope, she saw the spotter's head snap sideways. The binoculars fell from his hands. He collapsed behind a boulder, and the mortar team suddenly had no one to tell them where to aim. 5 rounds left. Mackenzie worked the bolt, not allowing herself to think about the face she had just seen, about how young he had been. There would be time for that later. If there was a later, right now she had a job to do. The mortars fell silent, the crew scrambling for cover without their spotter to direct them. But the valley was still full of Taliban fighters, and they were getting smarter. Spreading out, using cover, searching for the sniper who was killing them from a distance they could barely comprehend. Harrison's voice came from behind her, weak and slurred. Mac, did you get him? Yes. Good, that's good. He coughed, and she heard the wet rattle in his chest. Not good. Your father, he would have made that shot too. Save your strength, Harrison. Need to tell you something. Tell me later. Might not be a later. Another cough. Got cancer, Mac. Stage 4. Pancreatic. 6 months, they said. That was 4 months ago. Mackenzie turned to look at him. His eyes were clearer now, focused on her face with an intensity that cut through the pain and confusion. This deployment, this was my choice. My way out. On my terms. Better than wasting away in some hospital. You should have told me. Harrison smiled and blood stained his teeth. Would you have let me come if you'd known? She did not answer because they both knew the truth. Your father saved my life once. Harrison continued, his voice fading. Now I get to return the favor. Get to watch his daughter become the legend he always knew she'd be. Harrison, the sand sock. Take it. Use it. Make it count for both of us. His eyes drifted closed, and for a terrifying moment, Mackenzie thought he had died. But then his chest rose with a shallow breath. Still alive. Still fighting. She turned back to the scope, felt the weight of Harrison's sand sock beneath her rifle, next to her grandfather's. 2 dying men passing their legacy to her. 2 ghosts lending their strength. She would not waste it. The radio crackled with Captain Garrison's voice, tight with controlled panic. Overwatch, we have a problem. Big problem. The convoy is stopped. Engine trouble on one of the trucks. We are exposed, and they are closing in. We need more fire support, and we need it now. Mackenzie scanned the valley, looking for the next threat. There. A second technical, this one mounting a different weapon. Not a DSHK, something worse. A Type 87 automatic grenade launcher. Chinese-made. Fires a 40mm grenade every 3 seconds. Designed to shred light vehicles and infantry in the open. If that weapon opened up on the stalled convoy, it would be a slaughter. Range 1,600 yards. Wind had picked up to 24 knots. The thermal layer rising from the valley floor created a mirage effect, making the target shimmer and dance in her scope. This was not a shot. This was a prayer with ballistics. She dialed her elevation, checked the kestrel. The wind was gusting, now no longer steady. She would have to time it, wait for the lull between gusts. Through the scope, she watched the grenade launcher's crew loading their weapon. 3 men, working quickly, efficiently. They had done this before. Mackenzie focused on the gunner. He was older than the others, maybe 40, competent, dangerous. He wore a tan vest over his shalwar kameez and had the look of a man who knew his craft. He reminded her of Dutch Callahan, a professional warrior who had spent his life perfecting the art of killing. She would respect that, but she would still kill him. The wind gusted hard, then dropped. For 3 seconds, it fell to 18 knots. Steady, predictable. Mackenzie took the shot. The bullet flew for nearly 2 full seconds. Long enough for doubt to creep in, long enough to wonder if she had miscalculated, long enough to pray. Then the grenade launcher gunner dropped. The weapon fell silent. His crew scattered. 4 rounds left. The valley erupted into chaos. The Taliban forces were no longer advancing. They were hunting. Dozens of fighters turned their attention to the ridgeline, pouring fire at a target they could not see. Bullets sparked off the concrete around Mackenzie's position, whining away into the sky like angry hornets. She ducked below the sandbags, feeling the impacts shake the structure. They were getting close. Too close. Overwatch, this is Reaper 7. We just picked up radio chatter. They are calling in a counter sniper. Repeat, they have a specialist sniper en route to your position. Guy they call the Chechen. He is good Overwatch. Real good. Mackenzie keyed the mic. Copy Reaper 7. Let him come. She meant it. Part of her, the part that had been forged in the Kentucky woods and tempered at Fort Benning, welcomed the challenge. A duel. Sniper versus sniper. The oldest game. The bullets stopped. An eerie silence fell over the valley. The Taliban fighters had taken cover, waiting for their specialist to do his work. Mackenzie scanned through her scope, searching. Where would she set up if she were him? High ground. Good visibility. Multiple escape routes. There. A glint of glass 850 yards to the northwest. On a shelf of rock that overlooked her position. Perfect spot for a counter sniper hide. She was looking right at him when he fired. The bullet passed 3 inches from her head with a crack like a whip splitting the air. She felt the pressure wave, felt the heat of the round's passage. Close enough to smite the burnt copper of the jacket. Close enough to die. She dropped below the sandbags, her heart hammering. That had been too close. Way too close. He had ranged her position perfectly. The next shot would not miss. Behind her, Harrison made a sound that might have been a laugh. Told you. He's good. Mackenzie's mind raced. She could not raise her head without giving him a shot. But she could not stay pinned down while the convoy was exposed. Stalemate. Unless she changed the rules. She closed her eyes, visualizing the terrain. The Chechen was 850 yards out, elevated position, good cover. He would be watching her last known position, waiting for her to pop up so he could take the shot. So she would not pop up in the same place. Mackenzie low-crawled to the right, moving with agonizing slowness. Every movement had to be invisible. Every shift of weight had to be silent. She had learned this at Fort Benning, in the stalking lanes where the instructors watched with eagle eyes and failed you for the smallest mistake. She crawled 20 feet, 30, found a new firing position behind a different section of collapsed wall. Slowly, incrementally, she raised her scope above the edge. The Chechen was still watching her original position. She could see him now, partially visible through a gap in the rocks. Dark clothing, bearded face, calm eyes. He held his rifle with the ease of long practice. A professional. Like her. Through her scope, their eyes met for one impossible instant. He saw her. She saw him. 2 hunters recognizing each other across the distance. Then Dutch Callahan's voice came to her, rough and uncompromising. Counter sniper is Chess Thornwell. Patience wins. She waited. Her breathing became stone. Her body merged with the weapon. The Chechen shifted his position, trying to acquire her. His barrel swung toward her new location. Mackenzie fired first. The bullet caught him high in the chest, punching through tissue and bone. Through the scope, she saw him fold over his rifle, then slide backward out of view. 3 rounds left. The silence that followed was profound. The Taliban fighters in the valley had just watched their best shooter fall. The man who was supposed to turn the tide. The legend. Dead. Captain Garrison's voice cracked over the radio, and this time there was no hiding the awe. Overwatch! Did you just kill the Chechen? Mackenzie worked the bolt. Fresh round, 3 left. Confirmed Hitman 6, counter sniper eliminated. Lady Death, Garrison's voice was quiet, reverent. You really are Lady Death. The battle was not over. The Taliban still outnumbered them. The convoy was still exposed. But something had changed. The enemy fighters were no longer advancing with confidence. They were moving carefully now, knowing that death could reach out from the mountain and touch them at distances they could not fathom. They had learned fear. Mackenzie scanned the valley, looking for the next threat. The mortars had fallen silent. The heavy weapons were suppressed. But there were still hundreds of fighters down there, and they were regrouping. Then she saw him. Deep in the valley, behind a section of blue-tiled wall that might have once been a mosque. A man in a clean uniform holding a satellite phone to his ear. He was gesturing, pointing, coordinating. The commander, the brain, everything the enemy was doing flowed through him. Every order, every movement, every strategy. Cut off the head and the body would thrash for a while, then die. Mackenzie checked the range, 1,847 yards, over a mile. At that distance, the bullet would be in flight for nearly 4 full seconds. The Earth's rotation would actually move the target during the bullet's flight. Wind could push the round 3 feet off course. Temperature differences at different altitudes would affect the trajectory. A dozen variables, any one of which could turn a perfect shot into a miss. It was beyond the effective range of her rifle, beyond what most snipers would even attempt. But Mackenzie Thornwell was not most snipers. She keyed the radio. Hitman 6, I have eyes on enemy commander. Range 1847 yards. Requesting permission to engage. There was a long pause. Then Garrison's voice came back, careful and measured. Overwatch. That is beyond max effective range. Are you sure? Mackenzie looked down at the 2 sand socks beneath her rifle. Her grandfather's from World War II. Harrison's from Desert Storm. 3 generations of American snipers, their wisdom compressed into olive drab wool and plastic beads. I am sure, Hitman 6. Then take the shot, Overwatch, and may God guide your hand. Mackenzie began her preparations with the methodical focus of a surgeon. She checked the kestrel. Wind 18 knots shifting to 22 in gusts. She would have to time the lull. Elevation 52 clicks up. More than she had ever dialed before. She counted each click, feeling the turret move beneath her fingers. Coriolis effect at this range and latitude, the Earth's rotation would push the bullet point 3 mils right. She adjusted her hold. Air density thin at this altitude. Less resistance. Flatter trajectory, but less stability. The bullet would be dancing on the edge of instability. Temperature 84 degrees and climbing. Hot air rising from the valley floor, creating thermal layers like invisible walls. She checked the kestrel again. Checked it twice. Memorized every number. Then she closed her eyes and felt for the wind. Not with instruments. With her skin. With the same instinct that had let her find deer in West Virginia thickets when she was 10 years old. The wind was a living thing. It had moods, patterns. Right now it was gusting, but there was a rhythm to it. Gust for 5 seconds, lull for 3, gust for 5, lull for 3. She would take the shot in the lull. Through the scope, she watched the commander. He was still on the phone, still coordinating. Unaware that death was watching him from over a mile away, she adjusted her hold. 3.2 mils left for wind. Up another half mil for the uphill angle. Right 0.3 for Coriolis. Her breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped to 42 beats per minute. The world narrowed to a point so fine it could split atoms. She heard her grandfather's voice, distant but clear. 1 shot, 1 life. Make it count. She heard her father's voice, gentle and certain. In that pause after you exhale, that is where you find peace. She heard Harrison's voice, weak but defiant. Make it count for both of us. The wind gusted, held, began to drop. Mackenzie found the pause after her exhale. The universe held its breath. She let the rifle release its energy. The recoil punched her shoulder. The sound rolled down the valley like the voice of God. Second one. The bullet screamed through the air at 2,980 feet per second. The commander was still talking on his phone. Second 2. The bullet crossed the thermal layer rising from the valley floor. The heat pushed it slightly right. Mackenzie's hold had predicted this. The bullet held true. Second 3. The wind gusted unexpectedly, a cross breeze from the east. For a horrifying instant, Mackenzie thought she had missed. But the bullet had already passed through the worst of it. Second 4 impact. The commander did not hear the shot, did not see the bullet. One moment he was coordinating an assault that would have killed thousands. The next moment he was gone, thrown backward by kinetic energy that defied human understanding. The satellite phone spun through the air, shattered against the blue tiles. The valley froze. 800 Taliban fighters suddenly had no orders, no coordination, no brain directing their movements. They looked to each other, looked to the ridgeline, looked at the space where their commander had been standing. Then slowly at first they began to retreat. It started with the fighters on the flanks, then the center. Then it became a rout, men running for their lives from an enemy they could not see, could not fight, could not understand. Captain Garrison's voice came through the radio, stunned into silence for 5 full seconds before he could speak. Overwatch, did you? The commander is down. The entire force is breaking. They are running, all of them. Mackenzie worked the bolt one last time. 2 rounds left. Confirmed Hitman 6. Target eliminated. Valley is clear for convoy movement. Overwatch, what was that range? We saw the shot. We timed it. 4 seconds of flight time. That is over a mile. 1,847 yards, Hitman 6. The radio went silent again. then multiple voices overlapping. Did she say 1800? That is impossible. I just watched it happen. Who is this shooter? Captain Garrison's voice cut through the chatter, quiet and full of something like reverence. That is Lady Death, and she just made history. Mackenzie sat back against the sandbags, her hands beginning to shake with delayed adrenaline. The valley was clearing. The refugees would live. Harrison was still breathing behind her. The mission was complete. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in concrete dust and Harrison's blood and her own sweat. The hands of a 26-year-old woman who had just done something that would be studied in sniper schools for the next 50 years. She did not feel like a hero. She felt tired, empty. She had killed men today. Young men, old men, men who were someone's sons and brothers and fathers. But she had also saved 2,000 innocent people who would never know her name. That would have to be enough. The battle was over, but the war inside Mackenzie's head had just begun. She watched the valley empty through her scope, tracking the retreating vehicles until they disappeared into the southern mountains. 800 men running from one rifle. The mathematics should not have worked. The odds should have crushed her. But she was still breathing, still watching, still holding a weapon that had just rewritten history. 2 rounds left in the magazine, 2 bullets she had not needed, 2 chances at death that had passed her by. The silence after the shot was more profound than any explosion. Mackenzie stayed behind the scope, watching the last of the Taliban fighters disappear into the heat shimmer. The valley floor was empty now, except for the abandoned vehicles and the ghosts of men who would never see another sunrise. She counted her remaining rounds one more time, as if the number might have changed. 2 bullets. She pulled the magazine free and set it aside, then cleared the chamber. The ritual of making the weapon safe felt like coming up for air after being underwater too long. Behind her, Harrison made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a surby. She turned to find him watching her with eyes that were clearer now, more focused. Did you make it?" His voice was weak, threaded with pain. "Yes." The commander dead, 1847 yards. Harrison closed his eyes and a smile touched his blood-stained lips. "Your father? He made a 1,200-yard shot in the desert. Thought that was impossible. You just beat him by 600 yards. I had good teachers. You had more than that. You had the gift." He coughed and blood flecked at his lips. "Help me sit up. You should stay down. You are hurt bad. Been hurt before. Help me up. Want to see the valley." Mackenzie moved to him, bracing his shoulders as he struggled into a sitting position. He groaned with the effort, his face going gray, but he did not complain. When he was upright, he looked out over the valley that was now empty of enemies. "Beautiful country," he said quietly. "Shame it has to be a war zone." They sat together in the ruins of Outpost Legacy, 2 American soldiers watching the sun climb higher over the Hindu Kush. The morning had started with 800 enemies and 7 bullets. Now the enemies were gone, and Mackenzie still had 2 rounds left. The math should not have worked, but it had. "Tell me something," Harrison said after a long silence. "When you took that last shot, the impossible one, were you scared?" Mackenzie considered the question. "No, I was calm, calmer than I have ever been. It was like the whole world slowed down and I could see everything clearly. Every variable, every possibility. And I just knew that the bullet would find its mark. That is the gift talking. That is what separates the good shooters from the legends." Harrison turned to look at her, and his eyes were bright despite the pain. "Your grandfather had it. Your father had it. Now you have it. 3 generations of the best damn snipers America ever produced. You have it too. Had it. Past tense." He gestured weakly at his shattered spotting scope. "My war is over, Mac. But yours is just beginning. What you did today is going to echo for years. You understand that?" She did not answer because she did not know what to say. The weight of what she had accomplished was starting to settle on her shoulders, and it felt heavier than any rifle. The sound of helicopter rotors echoed down the valley. 2 Blackhawks flying low and fast, their door gunners scanning for threats that no longer existed. The extraction was coming. "Harrison," Mackenzie said quietly, "thank you for being here, for spotting for me, for telling me about my father. I did not do it for you, I did it for him." Harrison's smile was sad. "But I am glad I got to see you work. Your father would have been so proud. Hell, I am proud and I barely know you." "You knew my father. That is close enough." The Blackhawks flared for landing, their rotors beating the air into submission. The crew chief jumped out before the wheels touched ground, running low toward their position. He was followed by 2 medics carrying a stretcher. When they reached Outpost Legacy, the crew chief stopped dead, staring at Harrison's blood-soaked uniform, and then at Mackenzie, who sat calmly beside him with her rifle across her lap. "Holy God," the chief breathed. "Intel said you were overrun, said you could not possibly hold against those numbers." "Intel was wrong," Mackenzie said. The medics went to work on Harrison, checking his vitals, starting an IV, preparing him for transport. He bore their ministrations with stoic silence, his eyes never leaving Mackenzie's face. "The spotter needs immediate evac," one of the medics called out. "Severe concussion, possible skull fracture, internal bleeding. He needs a surgeon." "Then get him on the bird," the crew chief ordered. He turned to Mackenzie. "You good to walk, Sergeant?" "I am fine." "You do not look fine. You look like you went 10 rounds with a freight train." Mackenzie stood wincing as her ribs protested. "I can walk." As the medics loaded Harrison onto the stretcher, he reached out and grabbed Mackenzie's wrist. His grip was weak but insistent. "The sand sock," he whispered. "Keep it. Use it. Pass it on when you find someone worthy." "Harrison, promise me." She looked down at the man who had served with her father, who had volunteered for one last mission, knowing it would probably kill him, who had given her everything he had left to give. "I promise." Harrison's grip relaxed. "Good. Now get me off this damn mountain before I change my mind about dying today." They carried him to the Black Hawk, and Mackenzie watched as they loaded him aboard. The medics were already working on him, running fluids, checking monitors, doing everything they could to keep him alive for the flight to the trauma center. The crew chief approached her with a different expression now. Respect, maybe awe. "Ma'am, I need to ask, what was the longest shot you made today?" 1,847 yards. The chief's eyes went wide and then, that is a record. That is a goddamn American record." "It was just a shot." "No, ma'am, that was history." Mackenzie gathered her gear in silence. The Mark 22 broke down into its component parts with practiced efficiency. Barrel, bolt, stock, magazine. Each piece went into its designated slot in her drag bag. She saved the sand socks for last, holding them for a moment before tucking them into a padded pocket. 2 pieces of olive drab wool that had seen 3 wars and saved countless lives. They would see more wars before they were done. As she zipped the bag closed, another soldier approached. Staff Sergeant Dalton, callsign Reaper. He was a big man, built like a linebacker with arms that looked like they could bend steel bars. He had the weathered face of someone who had spent too many years in the desert, and his eyes held the flat calm of a man who had seen the worst humanity had to offer. He stopped 10 feet away and just looked at her, looked at the blood on her uniform, looked at the concrete around her position scarred with bullet impacts, looked at the valley beyond where 800 men had fled from a single rifle. Then slowly and deliberately, he raised his hand to his helmet in a sharp salute. It was not a regulation salute. It was the salute of one warrior recognizing another, of respect earned in blood and fire. Mackenzie returned the salute, and something passed between them. An understanding. She was no longer the new sniper trying to prove herself. She was a peer, a fellow predator. "Ma'am," Reaper said quietly, "that was the finest shooting I have seen in 20 years of combat. You saved a lot of lives today." "Just doing my job, Staff Sergeant." "No, ma'am, you did a hell of a lot more than that." He glanced at the valley. "The convoy is through. 2,000 refugees made it because of what you did here. 2,000 people who will never know your name, but who get to live because you stood on this ridge and refused to break." Mackenzie felt something tight in her chest. She had been focused on the mission, on the shots, on the mathematics of death. She had not let herself think about the faces in that convoy. The children, the mothers, the old men who had already survived too many wars. Now she could not stop thinking about them. "Come on," Reaper said gently. "Let us get you off this mountain." The Black Hawk lifted off with a roar of turbines and a hurricane of rotor wash. Mackenzie sat in the troop compartment, her rifle bag between her knees, watching Outpost Legacy fall away beneath them. The ruined concrete, the bloodstains, the empty brass casings glinting in the sun. She had left pieces of herself on that ridge, pieces she would never get back. Across from her, Harrison lay strapped to the stretcher, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. One of the medics worked over him, constantly monitoring vitals, adjusting IVs, doing everything possible to keep him alive. Mackenzie reached across and took his hand. His fingers were cold. "Stay with me, Harrison. Stay with me." His eyes flickered open, unfocused, confused. Then they found her face and sharpened. Did we win? We won. Good." His grip tightened slightly. "Tell my granddaughter. Tell her grandpa went out, doing something that mattered. You can tell her yourself. But Harrison was already fading, his eyes drifting closed again. The medic looked at Mackenzie and shook his head slightly. Not dead, not yet, but close. The flight to Forward Operating Base Thunder took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of watching Harrison fight for every breath. 20 minutes of the crew chief stealing glances at her, this small woman who had just rewritten the record books. 20 minutes of wondering what came next. When they landed, there was a crowd waiting. Soldiers had lined up along the helipad watching as the Black Hawk touched down. Word had spread. The whole base knew what had happened on that ridge. As Mackenzie stepped off the bird, every soldier in sight came to attention. No one had ordered it. It just happened. A spontaneous gesture of respect from men and women who understood what she had done. Captain Wade Garrison pushed through the crowd, his uniform still dusty from the convoy escort. He was a tall man with a runner's build and eyes that had seen too much in his 35 years. Right now, those eyes were wide with something that looked like disbelief. "Sergeant Thornwell," he said formally, "on behalf of the entire task force, I want to thank you for—" "Sir," Mackenzie interrupted quietly, "my spotter needs a surgeon. Now." Garrison immediately shifted gears, turning to bark orders at the medical team. They rushed Harrison away on the stretcher, moving with the urgent efficiency of people fighting death. Mackenzie watched them go, watched Harrison disappear into the aid station, and felt suddenly utterly alone. Garrison touched her shoulder gently. "He is in good hands. Best trauma surgeon in theater. If anyone can save him, Doc Peterson can." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Come with me," Garrison said. "Command wants a debrief, and there are some people who want to meet you. I need to clean my rifle first." Garrison looked like he wanted to argue, then saw the expression on her face and reconsidered. "Of course, take your time. We will be in the TOC when you are ready." Mackenzie walked through the base like a ghost soldier, stepping aside to let her pass, staring at her with expressions she could not quite read. Respect, awe, maybe a little fear. She ignored them all. The armory was empty, a blessing. She claimed a cleaning station in the back corner and carefully laid out her rifle. The Mark 22 looked no different than it had 12 hours ago, but it felt different. Heavier, like it now carried the weight of the men who had died at its command. She disassembled it completely, laying each part on a clean white cloth. Then she began the ritual. Bore brush down the barrel, 5 strokes. Solvent patch, 2 strokes, dry patch, inspect, repeat. The smell of Hop's number 9 solvent filled her nostrils, a scent as familiar as her own skin. Her grandfather had used hops. Her father had used hops. Now she used it, maintaining the chain of tradition that stretched back through wars and decades. As she worked, her hands finally began to shake. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind the cold truth of what she had done. She had killed men today. Young men, old men, men who had mothers and fathers and maybe children of their own. She told herself they were the enemy. They would have killed innocents. She had done what was necessary, but the faces would not leave her mind, especially the young spotter, the boy with the soft face who had been trying to grow a beard. Mackenzie set down the cleaning rod and closed her eyes, breathed in and out, found the calm center that had sustained her through the chaos. "You did what you had to do," she whispered to herself. "You saved lives." But the ghost did not answer. She finished cleaning the rifle in silence, then reassembled it with the same careful precision. When it was complete, she held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it. 3 wars, 3 generations, and now her war, her kills. She placed the rifle in its case and stood. Time to face what came next. The Tactical Operations Center was organized chaos, radios squawking, officers studying maps, intel analysts processing reports. In the center of it all stood a cluster of senior officers, and they all turned when Mackenzie entered. Captain Garrison stepped forward. "Sergeant Thornwell, allow me to introduce Colonel Hendricks, battalion commander." The colonel was a lean man in his 50s with silver hair and eyes like a hawk. He studied Mackenzie with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex equation. "Sergeant," he said, his voice carrying the flat authority of command, "I have been reading the after-action reports. Frankly, I am having trouble believing them. 1,847 yards. That exceeds the record for confirmed kills by American snipers." "Yes, sir." "And you made this shot without a spotter, in combat conditions under fire." "My spotter was incapacitated, sir. I had no choice." Hendricks shook his head slowly. "I have been in the Army for 32 years. I have never heard of anything like this. The battalion is recommending you for the Silver Star, possibly the Medal of Honor." Mackenzie felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Sir, with respect, I do not want a medal. I just want to check on my spotter and get back to work. The colonel's expression softened slightly. Your spotter is in surgery. They are doing everything they can. As for getting back to work, Sergeant, you need rest. You have been through hell. I am fine, sir. That was not a request. You are ordered to stand down for 72 hours. Medical evaluation, psychological debriefing, the works. After that, we will talk about your next assignment. Mackenzie wanted to argue, wanted to say she did not need rest or evaluation or any of it. But she was too tired to fight, too tired to do anything but nod. Yes, sir. Garrison walked her out of the TOC, and they stood together in the Afghan sun, watching helicopters come and go. You did something remarkable today, Garrison said quietly. You know that, right? I did my job. You did a hell of a lot more than that. You became a legend. Lady Death, they are going to be telling stories about this for decades. Mackenzie thought about the boy spotter, about the commander who had died without knowing what killed him, about Harrison bleeding on a mountain ridge. I do not want to be a legend, she said. I just want the people I saved to get home safely. Garrison smiled sadly. Too late for that, Sergeant. You are already a legend whether you want to be or not. The next 72 hours passed in a blur. Medical examinations that found cracked ribs, dehydration, and minor shrapnel wounds she had not even noticed. Psychological evaluations with therapists who kept asking how she felt about killing people. Debriefings with intelligence officers who wanted every detail of every shot. She answered their questions with mechanical precision, giving them the facts without the feelings. Yes, she had felt calm. No, she did not regret the shots. Yes, she would do it again if necessary. They seemed satisfied, or at least they stopped asking. On the second day, she visited Harrison in the hospital tent. He was awake, hooked to machines that beeped and hummed. His head was wrapped in bandages, and he looked 20 years older than he had on the mountain. But he smiled when he saw her. Lady Death herself, he said, his voice rough. Come to check on the old man. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck. But I am alive, which is more than I expected. He gestured weakly at a chair beside his bed. Sit. Tell me what happened after they pulled me off that ridge. Mackenzie sat and told him everything. The shot, the retreat, the aftermath. Harrison listened with his eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Your father made me promise something before he died, Harrison said finally. Made me swear that if I ever met his daughter, I would tell her one thing. What? That she did not need to prove anything to anyone. That being his daughter was enough. That he loved her for who she was, not for what she could do. Mackenzie felt tears threatening for the first time since the firefight. She fought them back. But you did not tell me that. No, because I knew you needed to prove it to yourself first. Needed to know you could stand alone and not break. Harrison reached out and took her hand. Now you know. Now you can carry it with you. I killed people, Harrison. I keep seeing their faces. That is the price of the gift. You see what you have done, you carry it. But you also know that because of what you did, 2,000 innocent people got to live. Children got to grow up. Mothers got to hold their babies. That has to count for something. Does it get easier? Harrison's smile was infinitely sad. No, it never gets easier. You just get better at carrying it. They sat in silence for a while, two soldiers who had shared something that could not be spoken. Finally, Harrison squeezed her hand. They are flying me to Germany tomorrow. Better hospitals there. Might even survive this. You will survive. You are too stubborn to die. Maybe, but just in case. He reached under his pillow and pulled out his sand sock, the one her father had given him 20 years ago. I want you to have this. Really have it. Not just borrow it. It is yours now. Harrison, I am serious. 3 generations remember your grandfather, your father, me, and now you. Keep the chain going. Find someone worthy and pass it on when your time comes. Mackenzie took the sand sock, feeling the weight of all the years it represented, all the wars, all the lives saved and lost. I will, she promised. Good. Now get out of here. You are making me emotional, and I have a reputation to maintain. 3 days later, Mackenzie stood on the tarmac at Bagram Airfield, watching the C-17 transport prepare for departure. Harrison was inside, stable enough for the flight to Landstuhl Medical Center in Germany. The doctor said he had a 70% chance of full recovery, better odds than he had started with. She had visited him one last time before they loaded him onto the plane. He had been awake, his eyes clearer, the color returning to his face. They tell me I am too stubborn to die, he had said with a weak grin. Guess your father's luck rubbed off on me. You saved my life up there, Mackenzie had told him. Your coaching, your presence, I could not have made those shots without you. Harrison had shaken his head. You made those shots because you are your father's daughter. I just had the privilege of watching. He had paused, his expression turning serious. Promise me something. Anything. When you get home, go see my granddaughter. Tell her what happened here. Tell her that her grandpa went out fighting for something that mattered, that he did not waste away in some hospital bed, that he chose his ending. Mackenzie had taken his hand. I promise. But you are going to tell her yourself. You are going to survive this and go home and watch her grow up. Maybe? Harrison's smile had been sad. But just in case, promise me. I promise. Now watching the C-17's engines spool up, Mackenzie raised her hand in a final salute. The rear ramp was already closing. Harrison was somewhere inside, beginning the long journey home. She held the salute until the plane lifted off, until it became a speck against the Afghan sky, until it disappeared completely. Then she lowered her hand and walked back to her quarters, carrying the weight of one more promise she intended to keep. 6 months later, she stood in a classroom at Fort Benning, Georgia, facing 48 students who thought they knew what it meant to be a sniper. Master Gunnery Sergeant Dutch Callahan stood beside her, his arms crossed, his expression as unreadable as ever. But when he looked at her, there was something new in his eyes, pride maybe, or recognition. This is Sergeant First Class Mackenzie Thornwell, Callahan announced to the class. She holds the record for the longest confirmed kill in United States Army history, 1,847 yards. Hindu Kush Mountains, Afghanistan, October 2011. She will be your instructor for fieldcraft and advanced marksmanship. The students stared at her, some with respect, some with skepticism. One in the back whispered something to his neighbor, probably about affirmative action or political correctness. Mackenzie had heard it all before. She did not care anymore. Follow me to the range, she said simply. They filed out after her 48 would-be snipers who did not yet understand what they were getting into. Mackenzie led them to the 1,000-yard line where a target waited in the distance. One shot, she told them. Show me what you can do. They took turns. Some came close. Most missed. The whisper from the back of the class missed by 3 feet. When they were done, Mackenzie took her position behind the rifle. She placed 2 sand socks beneath the stock and found the pause after her exhale. The shot was perfect. Dead center. She stood and looked at the stunned faces of the students. Sniping is not about strength, she said quietly. It is not about size or gender or politics. It is about discipline, patience, the willingness to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. Some of you will learn this, most of you will not. That is fine. This job is not for everyone. She started walking back toward the classroom, then paused and turned. But for those of you who do make it through, who earn the right to call yourselves snipers, remember this. The rifle does not care who you are. It only cares that you are worthy of it. Prove you are worthy and it will take you places you never imagined. After the students filed out, Dutch Callahan remained. He stood at the 1,000-yard line staring downrange at the target Mackenzie had just perforated. I owe you an apology, he said without looking at her. Mackenzie stopped. Sir, at the schoolhouse, what I said about women, I was wrong. He finally turned to face her. I have been teaching this craft for 28 years. I have seen thousands of students, good ones, great ones. But what you did in Afghanistan, he shook his head slowly. That was beyond great. That was legendary. I just did what you taught me to do it. No, you did what I could never teach. The gift, the instinct, the refusal to accept impossible. Callahan extended his hand. It has been an honor to serve alongside you, Sergeant First Class Thornwell. She took his hand and something passed between them. The wall that had existed since her first day at sniper school finally crumbled. Teacher and student, skeptic and believer. Both warriors, both bound by the same code. The honor is mine, Gunnery Sergeant. Callahan nodded once, then walked toward the range shed. At the door he paused. Your father would be proud. I mean that. Then he was gone, leaving Mackenzie alone on the range with the echoes of shots not yet fired and the weight of legacies not yet passed. That evening she sat alone in her quarters, cleaning her rifle by the light of a single lamp. The Mark 22 gleamed under her careful attention, every surface polished, every mechanism perfect. On her desk sat a letter that had arrived that morning from a refugee family in Afghanistan. They had somehow tracked her down through the battalion, had somehow learned that an American soldier named Thornwell had saved their lives. The letter was simple, barely literate English, but the meaning was clear. Thank you for giving us tomorrow. Our children will remember. Enclosed was a drawing made by a little girl, crude crayon on rough paper. It showed a mountain with a tiny figure at the top, an angel with a rifle the girl had written beneath it. Mackenzie pinned the drawing to her wall next to her grandfather's medals from World War II and her father's from Desert Storm. 3 generations of warriors. 3 generations of people who had stood between the innocent and the wolves. Now it was her turn to carry the burden. Her turn to be the silence that came before the storm. She picked up the 2 sand socks from her desk. Her grandfather's. Harrison's. Worn and faded but still functional. Still ready to save lives. One day she would pass them to someone else. Someone who had earned the right to carry them. Someone who understood that greatness was not found in the noise and the glory, but in the quiet discipline of doing what needed to be done. But that day was far away, for now she had students to train, skills to pass on, the legacy to preserve. Mackenzie Thornwell set the sandsocks carefully in their case and turned out the light. Outside, the Georgia night was warm and peaceful. Somewhere in the darkness, a new generation of snipers was learning to find the pause after the exhale. 2 years later, Mackenzie received a letter with a German postmark. Harrison Blackwood had survived. The surgery had worked. The cancer was in remission. He was home in Montana living with his daughter and granddaughter, teaching the little girl to fish and hunt and find stillness in a noisy world. I told her about you, he wrote in a steady hand, about Lady Death, about the impossible shot, about how her grandpa got to be part of something extraordinary. She drew you a picture. Says she wants to be a sniper when she grows up. I told her she would have to earn it, same as you did. Enclosed was a child's drawing. A woman on a mountain with a rifle. Beneath it in careful letters, "Thank you for saving Grandpa." Mackenzie pinned it next to the drawing from the Afghan girl. 2 children, half a world apart, connected by bullets that had chosen mercy over massacre. She picked up her rifle and headed to the range. There were students waiting, skills to pass on, legacies to build. The rifle was clean, the sandsocks were ready, the mountain was waiting. And Sergeant First Class Mackenzie Thornwell call sign, Lady Death was done being underestimated. She was just getting started. On the ridge halfway around the world, the wind still blew through the ruins of Outpost Legacy, carrying the memory of the day when they sent a battalion and she only needed 7 bullets. The mountain remembered. The rifle remembered. The ghosts of 3 generations stood watch together. And in the pause between heartbeats and the stillness where legends are born, their legacy lived on.